Russian Soviet satellite causes concern for radiation hazards. One of the stories tonight on Washington Week in Review. Here is moderator Paul Duke.
Good evening. President Carter's first budget calls for a rise in federal spending, but the increases are not hefty, and there won't be much more money for social programs. The budget reinforces the more cautious approach that Mr. Carter is now taking toward government programs. As such, it is fresh evidence the president is pulling back from some of the lofty promises which he made during the election campaign of 1976. One of those promises, to choose federal judges and attorneys on the basis of merit, continues to produce repercussions because of the firing of U.S. Attorney David Marston in Philadelphia. Washington, like the rest of the world, is concerned about the Soviet spy satellite that came down in Canada, but there's a good deal of confusion about the dangers from radiation. The on-again, off-again Israeli-Egyptian peace talks appear to be on again, with the Israelis now showing signs of being more conciliatory. A closer look from Hedrick Smith of the New York Times, Charles Corddry of the Baltimore Sun, Christine Russell of the Washington Star, and Lisa Myers of the Chicago Sun-Times. The President, Lisa, has given us a hold-the-line, middle-of-the-road budget that does not appear to have satisfied either the liberals or the conservatives.
No, Paul, despite the president's attempt to walk a political tightrope, the budget was a disappointment both to those who had hoped that the president's innate fiscal conservatism would reduce red ink, and to those traditional Democratic constituencies who were hoping that for a reincarnation of the free-spending Democratic platform. And one would think that it may have been even a disappointment to the president himself, because the man who had talked so much during the campaign about bloated government and government waste was forced to preside over the first $1 trillion budget in the nation's history. Despite his claims that the budget was lean and tight, and even Secretary Blumenthal described it as frugal, actually it will carry a $60 billion deficit, which is only $1 billion lower than this year's figure. That amounts to about the third largest peacetime deficit in history. This is all this red ink is despite the fact that the president did not ask for any new social programs and any big new social programs, and sought only modest increases in jobs and other areas where there was considerable pressure for a lot more spending.
Well, you do describe it, or you quote Secretary Blumenthal as saying it is a frugal budget. And other people are saying this too, and it seems to come out much more conservative than liberal. Couldn't Gerald Ford have submitted this very same budget if he had been president?
Well, in terms of priorities, there are a lot of similarities between the Ford and Carter budgets. However, I think it's safe to say that any budget that President Ford had submitted would have been substantially lower than this figure. What struck me about this budget, Paul, was that whereas President Ford had really used his budget to lay down the gauntlet to Congress and say it's time to cut spending, President Carter really backed away from any fights. There weren't even any symbolic issues in there like water projects, which he wanted to cut last year. In fact, the deepest cut I ran across in the budget was due to a favorable weather forecast, which enabled the Agriculture Department to cut down on its estimates of disaster loan payments.
Lisa, you meant a $500 billion budget, didn't you?
Yes.
It's not really big. Let me suggest a theory to you, that is that the president, in holding this budget as low as he has, actually, has suggested that he really does have a balanced budget in mind and make progress toward it. And then in 1980, he can open it up to some of the programs that the liberals want, and he can walk both sides of the street again.
Charlie, if there were not a dime more of federal spending, nor another dime of tax cuts, the president might come out with a balance in 1981. But it's almost certain that we're going to have another tax cut before 1981, and therefore the chances of a balanced budget are almost nil.
Oh, I think that's right, but I think he's holding out the carrot. I mean,
he is hoping that tax cuts and prayer will get him close.
Yeah, because he only increased it, what, about $2 billion, $2.5 billion in real terms.
No,
$38 billion overall. Huh?
In real terms, Charlie, what he did was increase it about $8 billion over what would be needed to maintain current services.
Just what's going on. In terms of the tax cut, is it really going to survive the way he's sent it up to the Hill? Is it going to be cut? Is it going to be increased? You have Tip O'Neill on one side saying the president will be lucky or will be doing well if he gets half of his tax reform proposals through. On the other side, you've got the Republicans saying the tax cut ought to be, you know, much, much higher. What's your hunch about what's going to happen?
Well, I think both the tax cut and spending will be higher. The head of the House Budget Committee, Chairman Giammo, said today that he expected something in the neighborhood of a $70 billion deficit rather than a $60 billion deficit this year. And that's largely because of anticipation that there will not be, that most of the president's tax reforms will not go through, and that Congress will add a little bit of spending, although not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You said that he's obviously not, you don't think he's going to meet his goal of balancing the budget. What other campaign promises do you see that this budget might be violating? Are there any others that...
Well, obviously, the Democratic platform was a laundry list of new social programs, including, you know, most notably a national health insurance program. This budget really makes no mention of national health insurance except in passing, and I think that is probably the most glaring example.
Rick just mentioned a moment ago that Tip O'Neill is saying the president will be lucky to get one-half of his tax reform proposals through Congress. Well, the thing that all my business friends want to know is, what about the 3-martini lunch?
Well, I think the three-martini lunch is safe, Paul, and my friends on the Hill are predicting that after this fight, it's the administration that will be left with the hangover.
Well, Christine, as Lisa says, there was no mention in this budget of the national health insurance program, which the president advocated during the campaign and cited as one of the major priorities in the health field. And some people on Capitol Hill and people in the health field are disappointed about his recommendations in the health area.
Well, in terms of national health insurance, he has been bending both ways on this one, too. He's been under considerable pressure from the labor unions to come out with a proposal, and has said that he will come out with a proposal later this year, but there aren't any monies in this budget for national health insurance, and no one expects it to move anywhere in this session of Congress. In terms of any new initiatives in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is sort of a traditional bastion for such initiatives, it's a very modest budget. It's also an example of where belt tightening is needed. Most of the increases have come in the area of medical costs, particularly for health services, and these continue to gobble up most of the increases, for example, in the health area. And so they're counting upon reducing expenditures by clamping down on hospital costs rather than increasing things drastically. And in the areas where they did make increases, they made them in what might be considered rather popular areas of children, from unborn children, in sort of a nod toward their commitment toward providing alternatives to abortion, as well as poor children and even teenagers, helping pregnant teenagers receive assistance in discouraging them from getting pregnant in the first place.
There is a big increase for Medicare in here, but that's built into the budget, isn't it?
Well, these costs just keep going up every year. That's the whole platform on which HEW has been campaigning over the last year and trying to get their proposed hospital cost containment through Congress. They haven't been faring that well, and in fact, many of their figures in this budget are based upon the assumption that they will pass by, in the example of the cost containment, by July of this year, which is a prediction that might be overly optimistic. So these increases have been, in the health area, have been going up much faster than the rest of the economy, and they don't benefit the individual as much as they do the health care providers.
There's been some description of this budget as the 9th Republican budget in a row. On the specific matter of health insurance, what is your sensing of the attitude in Washington anywhere toward a national health insurance program? Beyond or catastrophic or beyond coverage?
I think that the number of proposals that have been produced every year have ranged everywhere from the catastrophic type that you're describing to the overall comprehensive kind of insurance that the unions have favored. At this point, I think that there are some indications that members of Congress are kind of hopeful that he doesn't send a proposal up this year so that they'll have to go on record. I don't think that the Carter administration is still dangling several possibilities out, and he is going to likely follow the same route they did with welfare reform. They've said they will come out with principles later this spring, legislation sometime this summer.
But there isn't any money around for national health insurance, is there?
Well, they keep saying that we can't have national health insurance until we start cutting back on health care costs. And until they demonstrate that they can do that, no one thinks that they can really move very fast in getting agreement on health insurance.
Christine, on another topic, abortion, which has been in the news a great deal. Were you surprised by the administration's pronouncement this week?
Well, I think that it was surprising depending upon your perspective. I think a lot of people, given the administration's positions, the personal positions of both Carter and Califano, had predicted that they would go with a more conservative approach.
What are we talking about now? We're talking about guidelines for the government to fund abortions for poor women, aren't we?
Right. Well, the legislation that was passed by Congress is very restrictive on the federal government's role in providing abortions. There was some language that was considered interpretive, and that's the language that people have said has been interpreted in a liberal way. For instance, the abortions that can be provided for women who've undergone rape or incest. Now, the HEW is claiming that this is just a legalistic interpretation, and they've also got the backing of the Justice Department, but they're likely already, the anti-abortion forces are claiming that this is going to open the doors and allow more abortions than they had anticipated.
So this is going to keep the big fight over abortion going,
I think the big fight was going to go on anyway. It's a fight that's never ending. But
let me ask you about the area of research, because here, too, in the area of scientific research, the president has reversed a downward trend in budgeting, hasn't he?
Well, the president has shown a personal interest in scientific research, partly because he has perhaps a science and engineering background. So in his budget message of his 5 priorities, it's kind of unusual that a president would pick out basic research and say this is important toward the nation's growth in technology. So he has given a large boost, one of the larger boosts in the budget of 11% in the area of basic research. But again, to be fair, this trend was started in the Ford administration in reaction to the large cutbacks that Nixon had made.
What about in education?
In education, they are saying that they are proposing the largest increase that any president has proposed since 1966. Of course, every year Congress increases those proposals, so in overall terms, it's not that large of an increase. One of their main areas of emphasis is on increasing basic skills like reading and writing, and one anecdote was outside of the briefing room where they were telling reporters about this was a sign which was, of course, misspelled, directing them where to go inside. So they obviously take this lesson to heart.
Well, another area where the president is not living up to his campaign promise, Charlie, is in the area of defense, because Mr. Carter told us repeatedly during the campaign of 1976 that he intended to cut the defense budget, and he is not cutting the defense budget.
He's not only not cutting the defense budget, and not wholly surprisingly, he's submitting the largest defense budget in the history of the country. It also is the largest increase there's ever been in one peacetime year over the preceding year. All of this was more or less predictable, and one wonders why Mr. Carter ever entrapped himself in that commitment to reduce the defense budget by $5 to $7 billion, but he did, and now he has to live with it. And in submitting the budget, he said he'd kept his campaign pledge because his budget wasn't rising as much as it would have if President Ford had been there. But what it suggests is that obviously he would have wanted to cut it. He must have been very much indeed persuaded that the defenses of the Western Alliance need the bolstering that his budget is designed to give them, or he wouldn't have bought the package from the Pentagon when they submitted it to him.
Is Congress going to increase this budget, though?
Increase the defense budget?
Right.
Oh, they don't ordinarily do that, Paul. There's always some room for Congress to cut it, and I assume that they'll cut this one. the appropriation request is larger than the spending figure of $115 billion, I think they'll cut it.
The most intriguing story of the week, obviously, was the story of the Soviet spy satellite coming down in Canada. What can you tell us that we don't already know about that story, Charlie?
Well, we've had such a outpouring of information that is right, wrong, and somewhere in between that I don't know whether I can sort out something for you that you don't know or not, Paul. I can suggest to you that the government handled this very prudently, although it's being battered from all over the world for not telling this or that country that this thing was going to happen. The fact of the matter is that up until the night before the Soviet satellite went down into the atmosphere over Canada, there were some in this town who thought that it could go into the South Atlantic Ocean. The point being, why alarm the whole world over something that might not come to pass? What might have come to pass had it gone down in 42nd Street in New York is quite a different matter, because this thing would not explode, but it would emit gamma radiation. It would make an awful lot of people sick and some dead. I think what we have seen is a refocused attention on the role of these satellites. This was a maritime reconnaissance satellite out there counting ships, and you can be sure we do too. So what we've seen is a new public attention, I think, on the role of satellites in the East-West confrontation.
Charlie, you mentioned the crash on 42nd Street, which may be different from another kind of crash New York has sometimes experienced.
Yeah.
But, I mean, are these things really that dangerous, and are they so dangerous that our leadership gets in touch with the Kremlin on the hotline and tries to straighten it out and make sure there's no accidental launch or some kind of military implication?
The way that the government said that it handled this one was to call attention of the Soviet Union to the fact that we knew it was going to happen. We did this in the 4 or 5 days in the middle of January. There were exchanges which were between the President's security advisor, Brzezinski, and the Soviet ambassador, Dobrynin, and they went to Moscow and told them they knew it was going to happen, and Moscow supplied information, and it is claimed that the Soviet Union was very cooperative in this matter. They weren't so cooperative that they told us it was going to happen, even as early as ham radio operators did. And so when you hear that we first knew about it in mid-December because out in Colorado Springs, our Air Defense Command's computer showed us, don't swallow that hook, line, and sinker. I'm sure we have people who can find out things as well as ham radio operators.
Charlie,
and early on, we knew this thing was in trouble.
Whatever happened to the satellite? The last thing I knew that they had found some uranium ore or something up in Canada and thought it was there.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, it dawned on the United States government that this was a Canadian story, and so the Canadians began to take over the issuing of information. And yesterday, they said they had found radiation about 200 miles west of Baker Lake in the Northwest Territories, and today they couldn't find it. What happened? I mean, the satellite bearing the nuclear reactor must have evaporated in the atmosphere. The reactor itself, presumably encased in graphite, which won't burn all that easy, may very well, I'm told, have come through the atmosphere at supersonic speed, hit the ice up there, gone into the tundra, and it may still be there, and occasionally if there's a crack, the radiation comes through. The other alternative, I mean, the other possibility is that it simply evaporated itself. Let me say, this thing is a reactor. It's not something that we use at all in powering. It powers the spy systems on the satellite, and when they're done with it, they're supposed to eject it way out into space where it'll go for 4,000 years or something.
I get the sense that none of these officials know what they're talking about. First, we are told that there was almost certain that the satellite burned up upon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Secondly, we're told that they're 90% certain that the radiation is the reactor core, and now it's vanished into thin air. What do we believe?
Well, you're to believe that in this territory where this thing went down, it isn't that easy to find something that's emitting radiation, and so they must continue to look. The picked it up, I believe, with a Canadian airplane yesterday. They picked up radiation. And real experts say this could not have been a natural source. In other words, they
What
thought,
does it mean in terms of future space law? I mean, people are now worrying, will this happen again? How many other satellites with these reactors are there up there?
Well, I don't know how many the Soviet Union has up there.
I think they have something like isn't this the 16th?
This is supposedly the 16th time that they have done it. What we ought to try to do is to persuade the Soviet Union not to use these things if they know a better way. I don't suppose we ought to tell them the better way.
Is it likely to become a United Nations issue?
Well, the State Department says that we will undertake all kinds of things to guard against this. I mean, the only thing you can do to guard against it is what was done. And that is to...
Don't put it up.
I mean, our computers follow every one of these things. They can call it up, the whole history of it at any moment, and to be on guard if it comes down where it shouldn't.
Rick, we're told that things are looking up in the Middle East now, that they're closer to a declaration of principles, and that the prospects are for the peace talks to now resume, perhaps, on a better note.
Well, that's right, Paul. We got a lot of noise and a lot of name-calling and some rather tense statements for a while there between the Israelis and the Egyptians, between President Sadat, Prime Minister Begin. But you may have noticed that it faded away for a while, and this was an agreed kind of lid and moratorium on public statements. And while that was going on, evidently there's been some behind-the-scenes negotiations, both out in the area and then here in Washington as well. Diplomats are going in and out of seeing Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State, and a number of his aides. And there is some movement toward a statement of principles, which, after all, was what they were working on or beginning to work on in the political committee before President Sadat called home his foreign minister. It looks as though on the critical issue of Palestinian representation, or how the Palestinians are going to fit into the thing, that there's been some movement by the Israelis and by the Egyptians, but particularly by the Israelis, toward the formula that President Carter used when he was in Aswan, that the Palestinians should be able to participate in the determination of their own future. That's not self-determination, quite literally, as President Sadat would like it, and it's something more than the Israelis had been willing to go along with
What
before.
about the continuing rumors, at least around this town, that some of the principals are going to be coming to Washington, say
Well,
Sadat?
happily, we can say that as of tomorrow, the government will announce that President Sadat will be coming here next weekend. It looks as though Prime Minister Begin will be coming along in March. Mr. Sadat presumably will be lobbying not only with the administration, but also with the American public to keep some interest and pressure behind.
Well, that was encouraging news. This is encouraging news for the president, and he's also got some encouraging news this week in the fight over the Panama Canal.
He has. There are rather interesting developments there. You have Senator Baker, the Republican leader in the Senate, and Senator Byrd, the Democratic leader, coming out together earlier in the week, saying that they were going to work together with joint amendments, proposing joint amendments to the treaty, which suggests good cooperation there, and Senator Byrd saying he was going to work out some kind of parliamentary procedure so that many members of the Senate could take part in the process of amending, and then a rather surprising show in the Foreign Relations Committee indicating that roughly 14 out of the 15 senators in that committee would probably go along with ratification. So even though public opinion still continues to run rather strongly against the treaties, the opinion is clearly shifting in the Senate itself.
Baker's getting an incredible amount of heat from his home state. How long will he stay on board?
Well, he's way... Baker's a waffler, and
I know, and there's a question of taking out of this treaty the sea level.
Right. Well, he's finding finding one after another thing to do to look for, a loophole. I don't know. I think he will hold on. What you're talking about is the provision in the treaties as written that if there's going to be any sea level canal, it will be built in Panama.
And then we insisted on that.
And we insisted on that, right. Well, Baker would like to get that out so we have a little bit more flexibility. Well, that's just one more problem. The other two amendments that Baker and Byrd are talking about, that American warships would have the right to go to the head of the line and American troops to defend the Panama Canal in the event of an emergency, these were things that were included by the President and General Torrijos in their statement last fall when they were here. So these are things that looks the Panamanians will go along with. And it makes the Senate feel as though it's taking part in the process of writing the treaty. And that appears to be very important in the swinging of opinion.
But they'll pass it in the end? Do you want to go out on that limb?
Not yet. Not yet. But I'm edging out for the end of the limb.
Rick, the polemics surrounding the firing of David Marston in Philadelphia were escalated this week when Speaker O'Neill attacked Marston as a Republican political animal with viciousness in his heart toward Democrats. What is the status of the Marston issue now, and do you think it's going to continue to haunt the president?
I think the status of the Marston issue is building. It seems to me there are all kinds of developments in that whole case, and they go far beyond David Marston, the Republican U.S. attorney in Philadelphia, who has been fired by the Democratic administration. The president himself has a problem, in that he told a news conference on January 12th that when he was asked about the Marston affair, after he had been called by Joshua Eilberg, a Democratic congressman from Pennsylvania, about it, whether or not he knew anything about a congressman being under investigation by Mr. Marston, as Mr. Eilberg was. And he said nobody had mentioned anything to him at all about a congressman being under investigation. Well, the charges went on, and the Justice Department then had to go around to make sure that neither the President nor Attorney General Bell nor anyone else had arranged the firing of Mr. Marston in order to get Democratic congressmen out from under the heat. And in the process, they took a statement from the President in which he said just a few minutes before that same press conference, somebody had told him that Representative Eilberg was of investigative interest. So he did apparently know something about it, and you're now getting questions about his credibility.
How does the White House explain this very, I think, significant discrepancy?
Well, they say that there's a difference between the president's thinking a congressman was actually under investigation himself and a congressman being of investigative interest, which they interpret to mean possibly being involved in another investigation. But the problem goes beyond that. Senator Schweiker is now calling for a special Senate look into the thing. When Ben Civiletti, it goes up from the Justice Department in a few weeks to be approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee as the new Deputy Attorney General, he is sure to be questioned about it because one of his assistants told him he knew about the Eilberg investigation.
There's also a House subcommittee which is going to look into it.
Isn't this another aspect of it, though, now? Aren't the Republicans trying to milk this for everything? Isn't Marston trying to do that?
Absolutely.
He's making speeches, holding news conferences all over the place.
There's no question that this has become a partisan issue. There's no question that the Republicans see an opening here that they hope they can exploit during the elections. There are already moves to delay the Civiletti confirmation hearing, so they'll take place a little bit later, and it will bubble along later on in the spring.
Rick, the issue is whether there was obstruction of justice or not. Does it come down to that in the end? I mean, is this going to be the burning one?
I think they're going to be more than that.
But the principal issue is that we must now get off the air.
What a shame.
Next week, we'll go into it again. I'm Paul Duke. Good night for all of us on Washington Week.
This program was produced by WETA, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Washington Week in Review was provided by this station and by other public television stations.
Channel 25's acquisition of the preceding program has been made possible by a grant from the city's service company.